says those aboard the chopper had decided it was too risky and were attempting to abort their mission. I'm John Trout.
Before I introduce my guest, as usual, I have a few things I need to say. One of them is that next week I will not have a guest. I will have a call-in show for the first time. That's going to be interesting to see how that works, being a novice to talk radio, but there's always guys around to help, Joe and George and Tim and so on, so hopefully we'll be able to pull that off. We got a couple nice emails and comments about last week's show about the American Revolution in the Mohawk Valley, and I was thankful for those. I also wanted to mention a letter from Mike Cinquanti today in the Recorder talking about the retirement of George Carmona from the post office. George retired last week after 30 years. George and I started the same day in the post office in 1985. I stayed 5 years, George stayed 30. And everyone who does any business at the post office is going to miss George. So George, enjoy your retirement. Library, Amsterdam Library this month having a free concert every Sunday. I went to last week's Penny Jar Band. It was fantastic. Free concert every Sunday this month at 2 p.m. Now, we still don't have an answer to our contest question, which is, what actor met his wife in Amsterdam? Now today, if you can't get it after today, then next week I'm just going to tell you, because you have to be able to get it today with the additional clues I'm going to give you. This actor was honored by the city of Amsterdam with a celebration at the Antlers Club in 1950. Okay, now this is, if you can't get it with this clue, we got a problem. He won an Oscar in 1943 for Best Supporting Actor in the film The More the Merrier. He also ran Union College's summer theater program for several years. And he played the sadistic doctor in Kings Row who cut off Ronald Reagan's legs. Do you remember that? Because when Ronald Reagan was elected, there was a lot of jokes because after his legs were cut off in that movie, he said, "Where's the rest of me?" And so many people were asking during the Ronald Reagan years, "Where's the rest of me?" And if that doesn't help you, go to Larry Hart's book, Did I Wake You Up? Page 32, and the answer is there. So now, between now and 1 o'clock, call me on my cell phone, my business phone, 842-7504, and leave a message if you know the answer. And if the first person to get the correct answer will win a copy of my best-selling book, The Virgin and the Strip Mall, and other essays on Amsterdam, the Mohawk Valley, and upstate New York. I hope you read my column in the Recorder last Saturday. My column in the Recorder is called Weaver's World. And I also wanted to mention that I noticed as I drove in, the sign downtown, the digital sign, says that anybody who wants to run for the Greater Amsterdam School District Board, you can start putting in your, picking up your petition packets or whatever they're called, starting March 19th. So that's next week. You can pick those up. Now, of course, Tuesday is St. Patrick's Day. And being part Irish, I thought I would like to devote part of today's show to the Irish in Amsterdam and the Mohawk Valley. And then part of our show, we're going to talk about economic development. And who better to have as our guest today than Robert von Hasseln, the city historian and the director of community and economic development. So we're going to be talking about the Irish in Amsterdam first, and then we're going to go on to talk about economic development. So Robert, one thing I'll say about Robert is this, and I always call him Rob, is that for a guy who did not grow up in Amsterdam, it's very hard to ask him a question about Amsterdam that he doesn't seem to have an answer to. It's always amazed me. His love for history has made him really dig and find out all kinds of things about the Amsterdam and the surrounding area. So Rob, do we know who was the first Irishman or maybe group of Irish and when they came to Amsterdam or to this area?
Not exactly. And let me say good morning to everybody who's listening. Good morning, Dan. Pleasure to be here. Amsterdam history is a little strange in that, unlike a lot of the much smaller towns, we've lost a lot of material over the years. Another complication was that where Amsterdam was located, where it's still located, of course, but back in those days, it was in the middle of the Catarrhosiris patent, which was a dubious, to say the best, land deal that was done with the Mohawks, and the Mohawks felt they had been cheated, so they basically said, don't settle anywhere in the area that is involved this patent. So that's one of the things that held up Amsterdam's development earlier on in its history. But we do know that there were a lot of people who, before the lands were officially opened up, were moving through here, had set up, in essence, what we would call squatters nowadays. And so probably the first Irish in the area were individuals, sort of like what the Dutch called the boschloper, or the French called the coureur de bois, the long-range hunters who came out through the area to trade individually with the Indians. And then finally, the man who would become Sir William Johnson enters the valley in the late 1730s.
Now, his uncle came first, Sir Peter Warren. Was he Irish?
Anglo-Irish, but he had holdings in both England and Ireland. It was not uncommon among the lower nobility at the time. Actually, his home, when he called for his nephew to come over and take care of his land in the valley, his home was New York City. He married a New York City girl and was at the time an admiral in the Royal Navy. So that kept him away from home. His lands were very much distant from New York. And so he asked for his young nephew to come over to manage the lands that pretty much are what became Port Jackson and the town of Florida. That was all part of the Warren patent.
Okay. Now, there's something interesting. I always like it when a historian finds out something new. And it was always thought that the first St. Patrick's Day celebration was in New York City, at least the first one in New York State. But you were examining some documents and you discovered that it wasn't. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Actually, I was going through the rather large collection of papers that Sir William Johnson left behind. And there's a note in there where he writes to the royal governor on the day after St. Patrick's Day, 1747, where he writes how he had a grand party and drank many toasts to the king and Your Excellency the Governor in celebration of St. Patrick's Day. And the earliest parade in New York City doesn't come till much later, and it actually involves Irish soldiers who were garrisoned there as part of the British Army. So the first recorded St. Patrick's Day in New York State was actually right down by where the train station is today. And this was only about 10 years after the first St. Patrick's in all of North America, which was held in Boston. So Amsterdam is right up there in terms of like Boston and New York City and getting claims. But in terms of the state, yes, definitely the first St. Patrick's Day was at the one of the earlier houses of Sir William Johnson, or then just William Johnson, which was located right by the train station.
I always thought that was a great discovery you made, and it's something I don't know that if all our listeners or many of our listeners are aware of. So, I mean, this is something that historians do that we don't always aren't always aware of. They're discovering new things, and I thought this was worth talking about. Now, when did the mass of Irish immigrants start coming into the area? What period of time would this be?
You've got waves of it, different periods, and it's different kinds of Irish, and those are distinctions, by the way, that they put on themselves.
Right.
For example, you've probably heard the term Scots-Irish.
Yes.
So you've got the Irish, you've got the Scots, and then you got the Scots-Irish.
Now, the Scots-Irish came from Northern Ireland, right?
Yes.
Is that correct?
And generally what they are is Scots who had been transplanted into what was called the Ulster Plantation, which was the English holdings in Northern Ireland.
Would this been under Oliver Cromwell?
Yes, Cromwell started it, and with the restoration of the royalty, they continued it. But economic conditions weren't that good, so a lot of them immigrated, and they are some of the earliest settlers of the Mohawk Valley with these Scots-Irish. Now, the interesting thing is, they would have probably not called themselves Scots-Irish. They would have just called themselves Irish.
Sure.
They were Irish Protestants, but they just considered themselves, after being there for several generations, Irish. However, the distinction as to who's Irish and who's Scots-Irish is something that develops in America in basically the 1840s, when you have another wave of generally Southern Catholic Irish, and they would, the long-established colonial descendants of the colonial Irish that came over, wanted to distinguish themselves from the new wave, which was very badly received by what was then called Native American, and nothing to do with Indians,
Right.
but basically, the ancestry, the descendants of the colonial stock. What they did is they started referring to themselves as being of Scotch Irish,
I see.
to distinguish from being Irish, because the Irish coming over in the 1840s and 50s were subject to huge amounts of discrimination.
So this division between Scots-Irish and what you might call Irish, or Protestant Irish and Catholic Irish, or Northern Irish and the ones in the main part of Ireland, that's what created, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we had all that fighting. Well, actually, it went back before then, but you had all the British coming over to Northern Ireland, and I mean, do you know anything about that, or?
Oh, sure. Actually, that happened here in America long before. Well, of course, Irish history is full of episodes of rebellion and the attempt to reunite Northern and Southern Ireland, and also to establish a free Irish
Right.
republic. We felt the impact of that here in New York in many ways over a century and a half ago.
Really?
One of them. Oh, sure. There used to be famous. Some of the. There's a good book I have called "Great Riots of New York City."
Right.
It's just riots, and you'd be amazed at the things that people have literally rioted in the streets about in New York City. I mean, like one of the famous ones is the Great Shakespeare Riot of 1849, which was an American better at playing Shakespeare, or was an Englishman better?
Wow.
And the two differing audiences, they had to call it the National Guard or the state militia to actually break up the crowd in Lower Manhattan. But there were a series of things called the Orange Riots in 1870 and 1871, and they occurred in Manhattan. And it was because the Scots-Irish, Northern Irish were celebrating the Battle of Boyne, William of Orange,
Right.
their hero. And
He was a Dutch Protestant king, right?
right, who was also later King of England, William and Mary.
Right.
So they celebrate the battle that sort of solidified the English hold on Northern Ireland. They were attacked from the rooftops by the masses of Irish Catholics who were then in New York City, and again, the militia had to be called out to separate the crowds, with lots of injuries and some fatalities. That's how deeply these things were felt back then.
Well, let's talk about Amsterdam. Were there any prominent Irish in Amsterdam, the surrounding area? Any, for example, were there any mayors of Amsterdam that were Irish?
Yeah, it gets a little difficult sometimes to determine, because because of the English and Scots that become the Anglo-Irish and the Scots-Irish and the Irish themselves. Sometimes it's hard to tell by names alone.
Right.
But, like, for example, Mayor Carter. Now, Carter, I believe he was a basically English background. But Carter is a name you can find both in England and in Ireland. But Dealey, Dwyer, and probably Carmichael all had some Irish ancestry in them. And
Wow. I didn't realize that. And what about industrialists? Did we have any industrialists?
yeah, the Irish, the person with Irish ancestry, other than myself, who I think is most.
Wait, did you say you're part Irish?
Yeah, I am.
Really?
I'm more Irish than I am German.
Is that right?
Yeah, everybody thinks because of my last name.
Yeah.
I must be like. No, actually, my ancestry. Literally, if you do the math, I have more Irish than I do, because I have pure Irish and pure German on one set of on my paternal grandparents' side. The other side is Irish, Welsh, English, and Scottish. So basically, I just reduce it down to the lowest commons and say Saxon and Celtic. But
Right.
yeah, my Irish. I have an Irish ancestor who first came to North America in 1588.
Really?
the lost colony of Roanoke.
The earliest ancestor of mine I know that came here was in 1660, and they weren't Irish. But my grandmother, I had a grandmother, Mary Carey, who was very Irish. And
Yeah.
I may have some Irish on my maternal side, too. I'm not sure.
Yeah, my grandmother was Anna Gilchrist, and was literally one step off the boat,
Right.
from County Cork.
So there were industrialists in Amsterdam who
Oh yeah,
were-
I think the I'll nominate a family as being the most prominent Irish, and of course, people have better ideas. They can't call today, but call me in the office or drop me a line. I think I'd vote for the McCleary family. Because there were McClearys in the valley. Actually, it's several families, and they're all sort of related somehow. There were McClearys here before the Revolution, and then there's another McCleary, William McCleary, who actually immigrates to here, probably because he's heard from relatives that it's a good place to be, in the early 1850s. Now, this is the McCleary who works his way up in the mills owned by Sanford, and eventually he'll combine with Krause, Wallen, and Howgate to create that firm, which eventually go through a number of name changes, becomes Mohawk Carpets.
Right.
So not only did he do that, he helped found the YMCA. He was a director of a bank, very prominent family. And so they made a lot of great contributions to Amsterdam. And of course, today there's a McCleary who's the owner of the Recorder.
Right.
So, oddly enough, they're also the most infamous Irish. Not these guys, not the ones I just mentioned.
Right.
But there's a story I was working on. You were talking about the interesting things you find out when you're a historian. It's every time some really awful crime happens here in the city, people will always come to me and say, "Huh, has that ever happened before? Who would have thought? That's never." And I'd be like, "No, 1951,
Right.
1911, 1882." And one of the more notorious crimes in Amsterdam history involves a McCleary who left his wife because divorce was not possible for Catholics,
Right.
and was living with his first cousin, and she poisoned him.
Ouch.
Yeah, he was a heavy drinker, so much so that he didn't notice he put carbon tetrachloride, which is an awful way to go, into his whiskey. He passed out, died, and when the police came to investigate afterwards, they realized that she sat there for 4 hours with the bottle in her hand on the bed before she finally decided to drink it herself. And it's like I said, that's a very, very painful way to go.
Right.
So they were McClearys that came over at a later date, also from Northern Ireland, to work in the mills.
And of course, we know the Irish built the Erie Canal. Harvey Chalmers
Yeah.
wrote a book. Harvey Chalmers, of course, as we all know, was an Amsterdam guy who wrote a book he wrote several books, but one was called How the Irish Built the Erie. Of course, they weren't the only ones that built the Erie. The Italians, I believe, came over to do the stonework for the Erie. Is that?
Yeah, the Italians mainly, the first wave of real Italian immigration you get when the canal is being rebuilt in the 1840s. And they come over here because they were experienced stone masons.
Right.
And at the same time, after the work on the canal is done, many of them stay in the area because they're now being used to build some of our more impressive cut stone buildings in the area. So they'll combine with the earlier Irish immigrants to create the first St. Mary's Catholic Church, which was actually on the south side,
Right.
closer to where the construction was. And as the Irish move up and on to other things, the Italians become more prominent in St. Mary's history.
So the Irish, from what I understand, though, did most of the digging, the dirty bulwark for building the canal. Is that true?
What the canal needed, especially when it got into certain areas that were very difficult to work through, like the Montezuma swamps out in the central part of the state, or some of the rockier areas, they needed thousands upon thousands of laborers. You have to remember that everything was done by hand.
Right.
Pick and shovel, chains and pulleys. but there was no advanced earth-moving equipment in those days. So the Irish were literally recruited to come do this because they worked for very low wages.
Right. Now, we know that those first waves of Irish experienced a lot of prejudice and discrimination, just like all ethnic groups that have come since then have. But it does seem like the Irish moved up into politics and certain things fairly quickly. Was that just the Scots-Irish, or was that Catholic Irish?
No, the
as well?
Scots-Irish, by the time the main waves, the really large waves that come starting around the time of the Great Famine in Ireland, and then continue on until the early 1900s when the state and federal government start to pass anti-immigration laws. By the time that the first big wave of Irish Catholics arrive, the Scots-Irish, the Protestant Irish, are pretty well established, and they've assimilated rather well.
Right.
What happens next is you get this wave of generally poorer people, less educated, and they're Catholic. And at the time, America was overwhelmingly Protestant and proud of it. And also, you have this tradition that sort of comes over to America from the English of being very suspicious of anything that's Catholic because of the whole Reformation and wars with Catholic nations. There was constant battle and intrigue, Guy Fawkes Day and the like. Anything you can imagine about the English Protestants being suspicious of any kind of Catholics, especially Irish Catholics. So when they get here, Scots-Irish, pretty well established, and that's one of the reasons, like I mentioned earlier, they start to call themselves the Scots-Irish because they want to distinguish themselves.
Right.
Now, the Irish Catholics, Catholicism, you can't believe how badly people felt about Catholicism in this period. This is the age of the Know Nothing Party, where one of the more popular books in America at the time was called the History of Maria Pope, which is about a woman who's a nun who kills babies.
Right.
And
there's been a series of books like that. I actually have a couple of them in my store. I came across when I was buying books that were similar to that, what you're talking about.
yeah, it's all, the Catholics worship the devil. They sacrifice human babies. They all this kind of stuff. And actually, the Know Nothing Party, which was a nativist movement,
Right.
Came close to actually getting elected on a national basis.
Right. We're speaking today with Rob von Hasseln, the city historian in the city of Amsterdam. This is Valley Vox on WCSS 1490 AM. Let's talk a little bit about the Irish in the military. It seems to me that I remember reading about the Civil War and that there were Irish regiments in the Civil War.
Oh yes, indeed. There were quite a few Irishmen fought both for the British and the Americans in the War of the American Revolution,
Yeah.
as well as the War of 1812. Interested in a lot of them also fought in the Mexican-American War. And here's the interesting thing: a lot of Irish Americans who fought in the American Army and deserted to the Mexican Army and formed what was called the St. Patricio Battalion, St. Patrick's Battalion.
Really?
So when the Americans finally conquered Mexico City, all these deserters were lined up, and there was a mass hanging of them for having deserted from the American Army. But when you come to the time of the Civil War, there were about 38 different regiments of basically Irish organization. And during these days, volunteers used to organize often on ethnic lines. You had the German, the Mozart Regiment, the Garibaldi Guard, the Italian Regiment, and several very famous ones composed what was called the Irish Brigade. And one of them was the New York 69th.
Okay.
The Fighting 69th is Robert E. Lee.
Was that New York City, or was there any upstate?
There were upstate recruits,
Yeah.
but it was basically formed out of by this time the Irish, it's kind of reversed. In the early colonial days, if you were looking for Irish settlers, you'd be looking up for them in the Mohawk or the Hudson. By this time, the Irish population is building in New York City and remaining stable in the upstate area. So they organized, actually one of the reasons the 69th organized was because they felt, and we were talking about the Orange Riots and things like that
Right.
before, that there was an inherent unfairness in that every time the New York's militia was called out in New York City, there was no Irish membership. There was no Irish soldiers. So they were formed to allow for a more proportionate response. And a very famous regiment. It fought at numerous battles during the Civil War. As they saying, Robert E. Lee actually gave it its name, the Fighting 69th, observing them. The famous Battle of Fredericksburg. They were charging up Mary's Heights, which was basically just a suicide mission.
Right.
And the Confederates knocked them back so many times that finally the Confederates got up and just cheered them for their courage. And if you've ever seen the movie The Fighting 69th,
I don't think I've seen it.
It's the story of the regiment in World War I, where
I have seen that. Yes.
Father Duffy and Orion, the whole story. Anyway, there's a great scene in where the unit is coming together and it's forming the 42nd or Rainbow Division.
Right.
And they're being billeted with the 4th Alabama, which has also been called up to serve in World War I. And they get into a brawl on a camp street, and one of the majors from the 69th gets out there and separates them, and they say, well, they say they beat the pants off us at Mary's Heights. And the guy happens to be a historian, so he's like, it's true. But they also tell you that they cheered you?
Right.
And they were like, yeah, now we're not enemies anymore, but we're allied. Well, the Fighting 69 still exists. In fact, they lead the Irish the St. Patrick's Day parade every year in New York. I was a regimental officer there.
Mm-hmm.
I was their fire support officer at one point, and we go to Mass at St. Pat's, and then we'd go out and get the wolfhounds and lead off the parade.
Well, let's jump back to the Revolution for a minute. The Scots-Irish, would they have sided with the British during the Revolution?
A number of them did, because particularly because of the influence of the Johnson family.
Right.
They tended to go more on the British side. However, there were a number of them. They had their beefs because of the way the English treated the Scots, Jacobites.
Sure.
I mean, those wounds were still pretty deep. So you end up like, of course, the greatest hero of the American Navy at the time was John Paul Jones. He's a Scotsman by birth, and so you have it's kind of like almost like the Iroquois. The majority go with the British, but some go with the Americans. I'd say overall the majority of Scots-Irish probably went with, from this area, went with the British. However, some of the other areas down south, for example, lots of Scots-Irish basically settled what's called Appalachia.
Right.
They're prominent on the American side, and they're at a key battle, Kings Mountain, where British basically lose everything. That puts them on the road to Yorktown.
We've got to take a break in a minute, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Rob about fraternal Irish orders in Amsterdam and a couple other questions before we move on to economic development issues. So this is Valley Vox, Dan Weaver here today with our guest Rob von Hasseln. We'll be back in a few minutes.
This is Ryan with the latest weather, brought to you by Patriot Federal Bank, located on Route 30 in Amsterdam, Erie Boulevard in Canajoharie, and across from the Holiday Inn on North Comrie Avenue in Johnstown. Today, March 14th, we'll have a 90% chance of freezing rain, turning to light rain as the day progresses. Wind will be at 6 miles per hour with a high of 42 degrees. Tonight we'll have rain showers early, clearing up later in the night. There will be a 50% chance of rain, winds at 8 miles per hour, and a low of 33 degrees. Sunday we'll have a 60% chance of rain with a high of 39 degrees and wind at 13 miles per hour. The latest weather brought to you by your friends at Patriot Federal Bank, hometown banking with the personal touch.
It's the Mega Coupon Savings Event going on now at Ruby and Query, with bonus savings in every department. Now is the best time to save on your new home furnishings. Spend $1,000 on guaranteed lowest priced appliances and get a $200 furniture gift card. Purchase any high-efficiency washer and matching dryer and get free detergent for a year. Looking for furniture or floor covering? Spend $1,000 on furniture or flooring and get $100 off. Plus, get a free upgrade to the Healthier Living Flooring Installation Package. Give your living room a complete makeover with a 13-piece living room package with HD TV for just $14.99 after coupon discount. And that's only some of our bonus savings. Keep your money in the bank with up to 48 months special financing. So come into Ruby and Query for the customer service and savings you deserve. Visit rnq.com for all of your coupons or come into the store located in Johnstown across Route 38 from the Holiday Inn. Ruby and Query, always the best for less.
Looking for a great night out with friends? Look no further than the Lanzi family of restaurants. Lanzi's on the Lake, 1751 Route 30 in Mayfield, offers a romantic setting for dinner where you can watch the sunset over the lake. Looking for a quick bite to eat? Head to the Sport Island Pub, 108 Riverside Drive in Northville, where they always have good times, good friends, and great food. Or head over to the Lakeside Tavern, 306 Woods Hollow Road in Broadalbin, the place to meet and eat. And you can't forget Partners Pub, 21 South William Street in Johnstown, your neighborhood pub and grill. Whatever you're in the mood for, the Lanzi's family of restaurants has you covered.
Patients are demanding a better, more comfortable MRI experience, and Nathan Littauer has answered that call. Hello, I'm Dr. John Mastrangelo, and I am Chief of Radiology. I am excited to announce that Nathan Littauer has added a new MRI suite featuring the GE Optima 450 with GEM, the latest in MRI technology. This new technology offers my team excellent images for better diagnosis and a user-friendly experience. The carrying design includes reduced exam times, a quieter experience, and a bigger exam area to reduce claustrophobia. Yes, we did it again. We brought the best technology to our area, and it is only available at Littauer.
It's your life. Take it, make it all that you can make it. It's your life. It's your life. Live it well.
Fresh Basil, Amsterdam's newest restaurant, is now open in the Riverfront Center, featuring an extensive menu from pizza to hot dogs, hamburgers, dinners, and everything in between. Fresh Basil features daily specials and offers eat-in, takeout, and delivery services. Give them a call at 212-2700. That's all at Fresh Basil, now open in the Riverfront Center, Amsterdam, 212-2700.
This is Dan Weaver back with Valley Vox and our guest Rob von Hasseln, who is the Amsterdam City Historian. And Rob, everybody knows about the Hibernians, but were there? Well, you can tell us a little bit about them in Amsterdam. Were they here in Amsterdam? And then what other Irish fraternal orders were in Amsterdam?
We know of at least one, and that would be this Society of Orangemen, or the Orange Society. They had meeting rooms on Main Street. In fact, the building that Ada has finished rehabbing right now. I think somebody gave you a tip about finding.
Yeah, I was sitting out here earlier this week talking to Jim Nicosia, and a guy came up and showed us photocopies of some documents, pamphlets that had to do with Irish fraternal orders that apparently met up on that top floor.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people talked about that little, I guess there's a little door inside the door that may have meant it was a speakeasy.
Well,
but then maybe it was for the fraternal orders too.
I think it was for the fraternal orders.
So they could see who you were before they let you in.
It's like the Masons. You have to have the special handshake. You have to have the special words. It's all part of the ritual that draws people into and makes these societies more intriguing and enjoyable. Jerry Snyder and I, when we first were looking at the building way back when, actually climbed up into the attic where we found these ceremonial sashes, which are consistent with the ones that the Orangemen would have worn.
Right. Now, did the Red Men meet there? They weren't. That wasn't an Irish group.
No, the Improved Order of Red Men met several different places. At one point, they met there. Other times, they were across the street.
Okay, so from these pamphlets that this fellow found up there in that building, I don't know if he found them in the attic too. One was about the Orange Men, and one was about a group called the Royal Black Knights, which I did a little research on myself and found out that that's actually kind of an extension of the Orange Men. And in order to become a member of the Royal Black Knights, you had to work your way through the Orange Men first. You had to become an Orange Man first. And of course, the Orange Men were Protestant Irish. They would be the Scots-Irish that we were talking about.
Yeah, or the Anglo-Irish.
Where the Hibernians would have been the Catholic Irish.
Yes, and it's very interesting how they made that distinction among themselves. Early on in the colonial period, people would have just said, he's Irish. Later on, the more established, the descendants of the colonial Protestant Irish are making the distinction so that they won't be seen like the new arriving Catholic Irish are, which was terrible. I mean, in terms of Thomas Nast, the famous cartoonist, the one who wrote, he used to characterize them like they were apes.
Right.
In fact, there are, just terrible bigotry in terms of not only the representations, but stories about drinking and crime and untrustworthiness. And so it becomes very interesting because even in the Irish Catholics, they start to make a distinction, and they talk about the Lace Irish and the Shanty Irish. And so the Kennedys go from being Shanty Irish to Lace Irish, and the ones they left behind as they moved up, the Shanty Irish.
Sure.
So we're really not like them.
Now, you remember the mural that was found up in that building?
Very well.
How can you forget? Because it was so controversial in Amsterdam. And I believe that on that mural was Sir William Johnson's home.
Yes.
And it made me wonder, it got me thinking after this guy shared this information with Jim Nicosia, and I happened to be there and was able to see it too, could it be possible that the Orange Men created that mural because Sir William Johnson was an Irishman or not?
Yeah, no, that's although actually, if you know more about William Johnson, he started out as a Catholic, and I think he sort of was a closet Catholic throughout the rest of his life, although he belonged to the Church of Ireland, which is the Anglican Church.
As you told me the other day, he pretty much had to do that if he wanted to have any amount of power in the colonies.
Sure.
He couldn't be a Catholic and have any power.
Yeah, he came from County Meath, and originally his name was McShane Johnson.
Right.
So he just anglicized it in order to pave the way for success. But again, I hadn't thought about that. I've always thought that it might have been there because it also features a supposedly Mohawk village. It's actually teepees, so it really looks more like the Sioux or the Western Indians. I always thought it was from the time of the Improved Order of Red Men, because I know that they did a mural over in another location before they moved over to this one.
Right.
So I figured maybe when they moved over to this, they just commissioned another mural.
Which may be. I just thought I'd throw that theory out there.
It's a good one, though.
The Orange Men wouldn't have known about, well, they might have, but they probably wouldn't have thought much about Sir William Johnson as a crypto-Catholic. They would have considered him a Protestant like they were.
Right. I mean, absolutely. He donated the Anglican Church in Johnstown.
He did, and he made sure the Bible was translated into Mohawk, and it wasn't the Catholic Bible. It was the King James Bible that was translated.
But on the other hand, it's worthy of note that even Sir William Johnson, a high royal official, did quite a lot to bring Catholic settlers into the Mohawk Valley, and even to harbor priests, because before the Revolution, under colonial law, it was illegal to harbor a priest. It was illegal to conduct masses.
Right.
And Johnson pretty much turned a blind eye to it and said, nobody's going to bother you.
Well, and Johnson, of course, was a master politician, knowing how to bring all kinds of factions together, and which made himself a very powerful leader.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about, we were talking about the first Irish, or St. Patrick's Day, and it being here in Amsterdam at one of the homes, as I said, it would be by where the train station is. That house actually got burnt down during the Revolution.
That was Daniel Kloss's
Right.
house.
And that the St. Patrick's Day you would have seen then was probably more like what you'd see nowadays. And for the 200 years or so in between, St. Patrick's Day was a very different type of thing. It was a big Irish solidarity, us against them, up the Irish.
Right.
And back then it would have been like, I always thought that, Sir William Johnson's earlier home was probably like the cantina scene in Star Wars, where you just got anybody from everywhere. You got, Irish, Scots, Palanite Germans. You've got Dutch, and you got, of course, the Mohawks, and they're all mixing it up, and they're all celebrating St. Patrick's Day, which is more to them probably like, hey, spring has finally arrived,
Right.
and enjoying the hospitality of their host.
And of course, nowadays everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. And in fact, there's 3 organizations in town selling corned beef sandwiches next Tuesday. And I was surprised that Myron didn't call up and say the Ukrainians were going to
Sell corned beef
cabbage. But I'll be going to my mother-in-law's house because my father-in-law, who just passed away, Jim Sheridan, was pretty much 100% Irish, and it'll be different this year because he won't be at the head of the table. But we don't have sandwiches. We always have the corned beef and cabbage and the potatoes and carrots and everything else. I don't know if that's really 100% Irish, but that's what we always have. We have soda bread too, which I like okay, but it's not the greatest stuff.
No, I wouldn't have it other than St. Patrick's Day.
Well, that's pretty much the only time I have corned beef and cabbage and soda bread.
It's kind of like matzah, it's Passover, the rest of the year, who needs it?
Right.
So, it must have been a wonderful party, and great stories in his letters about, they used to have like athletic contests, and the wonderful story about one of the things they did for the young Mohawk boys was they had a greased pig running around.
Right.
And nobody could catch it, but this old woman caught the pig because she had gotten something sticky like honey and put sand on her hands so she could grab the pig. But it's it's an interesting period and interesting holiday. I hope that someday we promote this more, and let people know, and this becomes another reason to come to Amsterdam.
Yeah, and maybe if we're going to put historic markers up, we could put one down there about the first St. Patrick's Day celebration in New York State was right here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea. I'll have to bring it up to the Hal Historic Markers Committee.
Right.
So.
And by the way, we have these 3 organizations that are selling sandwiches, and they're good organizations, and they need your support. But don't forget also the many restaurants in town that are serving St. Patrick's Day, and some of them advertise on this station, so support them as well.
As a matter of fact, I just came in, before I came in today, I was at Nana's Baker's Dozen,
right,
which is our new bakery and sandwich shop on Main Street. And was there for their sausage and gravy biscuits, which was quite good. But they've already got all the St. Patrick's products out on display. So
right.
You can pick up St. Patrick's candies. I'm sure they'll have soda bread.
Yes.
But no, I've always enjoyed. I've enjoyed the cabbage and corned beef.
Right.
I did not enjoy 2 things. I did not enjoy growing up. And then being stationed in New York on St. Patrick's Day is the excessive drinking.
Oh, right.
Which is,
we could spend a whole show on the Irish and drinking and whether that's a stereotype or not, but we don't really have time for that today. But all the Irish jokes about drinking and so on. There's been several books written. One called "The Hair of the Dog." Of course, the hair of the dog that bit you is a famous expression. I guess you take another drink to
whatever you were drinking last night that gave you the hangover, have another one, you'll feel better.
You'll feel better, right?
You're not getting any better, but you'll feel better. And the other thing I always hated was the wheezy, sentimental music.
Oh, yes.
I mean, Irish music is lively and it's bold. I mean, my favorites are like, Boys of Wexford or Minstrel Boy. It's one of the only songs I actually know and can sing all the lyrics to.
So Danny Boy would not necessarily...
Danny Boy's a good one, too. Yeah. But, I mean, it's, you never miss your dear old ma till she's 6 feet under the sod.
Right.
And I'm like, who sings about,
Right.
Even Take Me Home, I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen, which is
sure.
a wonderful song, is basically, I'm going to take you back to Ireland to bury you.
And you can imagine if that was sung in a pub where guys had been drinking a little bit too much, they would all have tears rolling down off their cheeks by the time somebody got done singing that, you know?
Yeah, or there's a title to one of my favorite country western songs, which, by the way, country western is a gift or a legacy that the Irish and the Scots-Irish gave to America.
Right.
That's one of their, like, jazz is basically
Sure.
comes out of the African-American population. The Irish brought us the basis of country western.
Yeah, and bluegrass even, because bluegrass came
Yep.
out of the Appalachian Mountains where you had so many Scots, Irish,
Yep.
and Irish settle.
So there's a great country western song called "Somebody's Playing Another Cheating Song," and I just threw my last beer at the jukebox. I've seen that happen. You know, at there used to be a place called the Liffey. There was that was the bar that the 69th Fighting 69th used to go to, and boy, there would be fisticuffs and
Right.
people throwing furniture around.
I do want to say one thing about the Irish American Club picked up where the Hibernians and the other fraternal orders left off. And what you need to know about the Irish American Club in Amsterdam, and I'm not a member of it, even though I'm part Irish, is that there is no religious test. You can belong to the Irish American Club whether you're Protestant or Catholic, which was not the case with earlier Irish fraternal orders. So now we come to the last question before we move on to economic development, which we don't have much time to cover. And maybe Bob was hoping that. Rob was hoping that. But anyway,
I need a break. I have not had a chance to do much history.
I know you haven't. Yeah.
So,
and I know that history, is really, really important to you. And
if you want to come back, you want me to come back and do nothing but economic and community
we can.
development?
We'll have. I'll have to have you back because we're not going to have time to cover much more than one or two questions. But before we do, I want to ask you. Actually, this is one of my favorite questions I like asking people is, what is your favorite Irish or Irish American film, and what is your favorite Irish or Irish American book or author?
Yeah, that's a tough one. In terms of a movie, I might go with The Long Gray Line, which is the story
I've
of
seen that many times.
Marty
I love
Moore. It's a John Ford romanticized
Sure.
Irish American story. But I think my first choice, I was talking this over with Maria the other day,
Right.
and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
I never thought of that one. That's a great.
Yeah,
I
and
love that
the-
movie, and
yes.
and the book. The book is superb.
Yes, it is. And you know what I like about the movie the best? I mean, besides the great characters and
Right.
the story being told from the young girl's perspective, she adores her father, but her father is your stereotypical,
Right.
Irishman. He drinks too much.
Drinks too much, right.
But he's got the soul of a bard.
Right.
And after he dies, and the widow is kind of being courted by the Irish cop,
Right.
which is another stereotype.
I know.
But very much reminded me of my Irish relatives in Brooklyn, where it takes place. And there's this wonderful scene where the Irish cop finally gets up the courage to say, "Well, would you mind walking out with me, and maybe we could be seen together?" And she says that would be agreeable. So then he sits down. He says, "Well, now that we're formally engaged, I think I'd be appropriate if I could smoke my pipe."
I remember that scene.
I had grandparents that were like that,
Right.
and that represents all the great stuff about being Irish. The family, the food, the music. It's a wonderful legacy.
So you're saying that would be your favorite book as well as film, or do you have an author, Irish American or Irish author that you like?
Well, Angela's Ashes come to mind.
See, that's what I was going to say. Angela's Ashes is my favorite Irish American both, because he starts out in Ireland, they move to New York, then they move back to Ireland when he's still a boy. When he's maybe 18 or 19, he steals his money from the lady he worked for, who never paid him enough.
Yeah.
And he steals money so he can make the passage to America. And then the second book is Tis, which I've read,
Yep.
and the third one is Teacher Man, all about his experiences teaching juvenile delinquents basically on Staten Island. Those are great. All three books are great.
When I think, you don't remember, Irish literature from most of its existence has been oral. And so when I tend to think of my favorite Irish book, I'm more thinking about either a play or poetry.
Sure.
Yeats,
O'Neill.
I'm trying to think, well, what was the other one I was thinking about? The Plow and the Stars the other day. Yeah.
I can't think of who that is. By the way, we're not going to get to economic development. I can see that now. We still haven't finished all these Irish movies and books. I've got a few things to say about a couple Irish movies I like. So we'll have Rob back another week to talk about economic development. By the way, this is WGY 1490 AM, and the show you're listening to is Valley Vox. It used to be a tradition in our family for years and years and years. We'd go to my mother-in-law's, father-in-law's, have the cabbage and corned beef and all that, and we'd always watch The Quiet Man with John Wayne. And of course, that's a John Ford movie, right? I believe.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's got every Irish character he ever loved.
Anyway, I'm not really a big John Wayne fan. A lot of people are. I got a good friend he's just crazy about John Wayne. But I really like that movie because I think to a certain extent John Wayne moves out of that character.
He's not playing John Wayne.
He's not playing John Wayne.
Yeah.
That swagger of John Wayne's, he actually practiced that. He used to practice that until he developed his swagger. But The Quiet Man, he plays a different kind of guy.
It's a wonderful film. That would have been up there. Another one I would have chosen would have been The Informer.
Oh, The Informer is another one with Victor McLaughlin,
Right.
who is also in The Quiet Man. He's the protagonist. What do you call him? He's John Wayne's nemesis.
Antagonist.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, John Ford really weaves a lot of his own Irish ancestry into anything and everything. In fact, two of my favorite movies are Fort Apache and
I love Fort Apache.
She Wore a Yellow Ribbon.
Yeah, I like both
and
of those.
it's part of they call them the Cavalry trilogy.
Right.
And a lot of the characters are Irish American immigrants, and one of them is former Sergeant Major of the Fighting 69th, the New York Regiment. That's the guy who's always tipping out of the bottle.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think Victor McLaughlin is in several of those as well.
Yep.
And I believe he won an Oscar for The Informer. I'm pretty sure.
I think so also, yeah.
The Last Hurrah, wasn't that about
Spencer Tracy.
Spencer Tracy
in Boston. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous, that ranks up there with like All the King's Men is an American political movie.
Yeah.
Of course, in that case, it's Louisiana and,
Right.
Huey Long.
Yeah, and
But-
another great movie, not necessarily dealing with the Irish, but a great movie.
Yes, a lot of great poetry, music. Land of Song, said the warrior bard, is one of the lines from The Minstrel Boy. And I like to get in touch with that Celtic part of my heritage from time to time.
What about the Molly Maguires? Did you ever see that with Richard Harris and Sean Connery and the coal miners?
I didn't see the movie, but most people don't know this. I took a break from the Army for a few years, and I was supervisor of criminal investigations for Pinkerton's New York office.
Yeah.
And the Pinkertons made their name taking down the Molly Maguires. So I solved a very difficult case. So the president of the corporation said, well, you have whatever you want, your own office, a bonus. And there was a copy of Pinkerton's original book where he talked about all of this on display in the corporate office. And I said, I want the book. So they found the key, they opened the case, they gave me the book. And I remember reading about all the Pinkerton agents going after the Molly Maguires.
Well, it's a great movie. Richard Harris and Sean Connery, and I forget who all else is in it. It takes place in the coal mining country in Pennsylvania. And my wife and I actually went to the coal patch town where that movie was filmed. And when the film crew came in there, they actually rebuilt this town. They refurbished it. There's still people living in some of those houses, but today it's a tourist attraction.
Yeah.
It started out this coal patch town that would have been demolished, I'm sure, at some point. But because it was used in this movie and brought attention to the Molly Maguires and so on, and Sean Connery and these guys were associated with it, they decided to turn it into a tourist attraction. Now, right now, there's still a few people living in those. They're not really fancy homes in that coal patch town, and every time a person dies, that house goes to the historic group running the place. So when the last person dies off, the whole place will be owned, and it's a great tourist attraction worth going to. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the town right now.
Mention it next program.
Yeah. Now, another movie, and by the way, that movie is underrated by several film critics.
Molly
like
Maguire's?
Leonard Maltin, for one.
Yeah.
He doesn't quite understand why this guy, Richard Harris, who he kind of informs, and he becomes a Pinkerton. And he turns against his own people to a certain extent by catching Sean Connery, by going undercover and so on. And he doesn't understand. I don't think Leonard Maltin quite understood the complexity of being Irish and turning in your own countrymen, but at the same time you could see that Harris had this kind of respect for Connery, who was one of the leaders of the Molly Maguires in the movies. And of course, the Molly Maguires came out of the Hibernians.
Right, and there's so many other things we could have talked about today that came out of the Hibernians or the cross connections. We didn't even talk about the Fenian movement, which is always
That's
one of
right.
Yeah,
That reminds me of Finian's Rainbow, which for some reason I never cared for that movie too much.
it's all right. It's kind of a little bit greeting card Irish.
Yes.
It's like, how are things in Glockamora?
Which John Ford is great a director as he was, and I think he was. He kind of fed into this whole Irish stereotype with some of the things he did in his movies.
It was just like, if I saw another Shamrock, I was probably going to barf.
Yeah, I know.
It was a lot better. Finian's Rainbow was never one of my favorites. Of course, it's one Scottish and one's Irish, but Brigadoon is a much better.
Right, I've seen that a couple times. Well, we've exhausted our hour, and we never got to economic development, but there's always another day for that, and I would really like to have you back, Rob, to talk about that.
Sure.
Because there's
Anytime.
things, especially this power plant idea the mayor talked about, is really intriguing to me, because
Yes.
I think one place that cities can go and with economic development is creating power. And some cities have done that by installing windmills and other things. And if you're having trouble bringing industry in, well, then create power and save a lot of money on power.
And that's a reason for businesses to come in, because they get lower cost power.
That's right.
And it's not just the micro generator or microgrid that the mayor is talking about. We're also looking at some other alternative power generation projects for the city to make us a power generating hub,
Right.
either not only in terms of the electrical power, but in terms of the equipment manufacture.
And that is the end of Valley Vox for today. This is Dan Weaver. I'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening.
$1490 AM, WCSS Amsterdam, Cranesville Radio Network's flagship station. I'm J.C. Hayes, and it's time for Beatles Weekly.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored by their country, decorated by their queen, and loved here in America, here are the Beatles.
I'm Ringo and I play the drums. Well, I'm Paul and I play the bass. I'm George and I play a guitar. I'm John and I too play a guitar.
And here they are, the Beatles. Welcome, the Beatles.
Well, hello there, Beatle fans. Here we go again. J.C. Hayes here with another edition of Beatles Weekly. Oh, boy, we have a great show in store for you today as we rewind to some Beatles releases this week in history, including one that was released in 1968 this very week. Which Beatles song hit number one this week in 67? Well, we'll play that one for you. In Beatles news, Ringo releases a new album, and we've got the premiere cut for you from his new album. And more tour dates for Paul McCartney. All that and more ahead on this weekend's Beatles Weekly.
It's the Beatles!